long it takes Isaac to catch up here. As you can see, brought the helmet. Oh, there he is. Alright. Come on! It sucks when your bait is real slow. Alright, maybe it's better. Tracks you're seeing are mine. No one else has been back in here. Not in a while. Pretty dense in there and it's pretty tight on the trail. It makes it a little nerve-wracking more towards sunset, but just waiting a second for the bait to catch up. You got to remember to keep your bait close for it to be effective. Watch out for hidden obstacles, kids. Alright, I see headlights coming through the trees. He's still following. It looks like sunset, but it's only 2:30 in the afternoon, but technically this time of year it's always looking like it's sunsetting. out here. Look at that stuff. Jeez. Still waiting on the bait. Let me turn around here and make sure he's okay. Oh, there he is. His lights are coming. There, you can see him through the grass there. Alright, we'll catch with you in just a minute here. Hey, greetings. Thanks for joining me. It's Fred in Alaska. I was hoping to have Miss Carol's update video up today, but due to my own ignorance of technology, Squatchbait had already put some stuff on Nextcloud, and I had done something to my computer. But anyway, I'll get a hold of him here a little bit later and get that fixed. But until then, what I wanted to share with you today, it involves animals. However, none of them were hurt, so it's just you'll see. So Donnie and Becca, brother and sister. Oh, Tank's over there drinking water. Save some for the whales, Lunk. But so Donnie and Becca, this happened when they were Donnie, he was 10 and Becca was 12. They come from a village in the YK Delta. For those who don't know, it's Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Now, they didn't want their village shared. Donnie still lives there. Becca does not. Again, this happened when Donnie was 10, Becca was 12, and they're in their early 20s now. So we're going back roughly a decade. So this particular village, the way it's lined out, it's one main road basically, and a bunch of different hut houses. Now, hut houses, they came into play back in the 70s and 80s. They're basically like little green monopoly houses. They're all cookie cutter. Their insides are laid out a little differently from 2 to 3 bedroom. But that's basically the layout of just one strip of road. And you got a couple dozen of them. A dozen on one side of the road, dozen on the other. Well, this particular trail that they went out on loops around the whole place, and at one end you have a runway, and at the other end is just where the wilderness takes off into the mountains. So what they were doing was they were riding around on their uncle's Snowmachine, and they were on the back side of this trail. And you got to understand, this is like 400 yards from the village proper. They're in their backyard, literally in their backyard. But on the Snowmachine run, there's this little spot that Donnie really wanted to camp out at, right? And so he told Becca, hey, let's go get permission. I want to camp out there, and let's see if they'll let us. Okay, now this is wintertime. They're on a Snowmachine. So they go back, they ask for permission, and their uncle agrees, hey, I will help you out. I got a hot tent. We'll go set up the canvas tent for you guys. We'll leave it up for a little bit, but you got to treat it with respect and everything like that. And so from what I gathered from what Donnie told me, the uncle was really big on allowing these kids to earn their way, give them a chance. In other words, instead of just shutting them down, he's going to give them a chance to use obviously using the Snowmachine, and they never disrespected it. And so he was really willing and able to, set up this dry tent with the heat. So over the course of a couple days, his uncle slowly going out there talking with Donnie about, properly running the stove, which Donnie already knew from inside the house, all that kind of stuff. But the uncle was just reiterating safety things, right? Now, the very last house in these row of hut houses was a person who had a dog sled team. And this dog sled team, there was about a dozen of them. So they were always barking, yapping constantly, right? So they were used to it, no big deal. That comes into play later. So they're over there, they get set up, and finally the time comes where the weather's looking like the snow is moving in, so it'll be warmer, because anyone who lives up here knows clear skies in Alaska in the winter. It's bitter cold out there, man. It is ruthlessly cold. So sure enough, they see the clouds coming in and the snow coming in. Perfect timing. It was about 27, 28 degrees from what Donnie was saying. Now, Becca, she was just going along for the ride. she wasn't really into it or not into it. She was just kind of there for her brother, right? So they get out to the tent. They use their uncle's snow machine to get over there. And, they had the sled, their uncle's sled as well, with their provisions for the night, their food, little firewood and so on, and a couple of lanterns and whatnot. And they brought a board game. They were going to play Sorry. Now, from what Donnie said, everything was going smooth, and they would look outside, and they got it pretty warm in there with that little wood stove, right? So they had the big flaps of this canvas tent open. He said it was a 12 by 14 canvas tent, and that's pretty good size, I actually had one that identical size, and it was plenty roomy. Anyway, so they had the flaps open, and as they were playing the board game, it was starting to get on in the dark, but they noticed every time they looked outside, the snow was getting heavier and heavier. Now, the way the uncle set it up wasn't fully in the tree line. They were about 25 feet off the tree line, and he set up poles and everything to run the pole through the top and tie it off and all that, right? So it was set up right. And so, they're watching the snowfall every once in a while, and, they're keeping the lantern just bright enough to see, but not to night blind them totally, you know what I mean? So, as they were playing the game, Donnie's back was to this open flap. And from what Becca was saying, as they were playing, she would catch snowflakes falling big and heavy in the background behind Donnie, and so it would catch her eye every once in a while. And she said about an hour into playing the game, they're kind of getting bored of it, and she was looking outside more than anything, thinking about maybe a snowball fight, And as they were talking and chuckling, and she was talking about making a snowball or snow angels or whatever, she noticed something dark back away from the tent moving in the darkness. Now, in Alaska, when it's snowing and it's dark out, if there's ambient light near around, you're going to see a certain glow from the snow. It's just your eyes, it's not night vision by any means, but you see the white snow. It's obvious, right? So it was damn near whiteout conditions. So when she saw this movement, she just assumed maybe their uncle was coming to check on them to scare them. Tease them, whatever it may be, or just check on them. So she jumps up. She's 2 years older than Donnie at this time, and she kind of moves Donnie out of the way and goes out the flaps and starts calling for her uncle. Dead quiet, not a noise. The sled dogs that had been yapping and barking the whole time stopped about 20 minutes before this started happening, right? The dogs went quiet, and they didn't realize that until later. So as she's sitting there calling out to her uncle, and she's not hearing anything or her uncle responding or anything. What she did hear, though, was movement in the snow, the crunch of the snow packing, because it was a pretty wet snow, so it made that crunch sound, if you ever walked in wet snow, that crunch where it's compacting under your feet. Well, she's hearing that, and it's moving around back behind the tent. And so she steps back inside, thinking nothing of it at the time. Tells Donnie, be aware, don't get scared, but Uncle's gonna scare us. That was her thought, right? So as that's going on, and she sits there and she's just waiting for this scare, Uncle's gonna scare her, poke his head in, whatever, right? Well, they're sitting there and it's dead quiet. The dogs just stop barking, and anyone who's been in a real heavy snowfall, everything goes muted. It's like having earmuffs on, because all the snow is insulating for sound, so it doesn't travel very far, right? So as they're listening to this crunching move around, it's coming around to where any moment now they're gonna see their uncle. That's what their mindset was. So Donnie had turned around, and he's literally just a couple feet from the opening of this flap. I mean, it's just right there. Well, as they're anticipating the uncle, all of a sudden, this dark figure comes into view, and snow was stuck to the hair. So it had a white appearance initially, but it was just all the wet snow stuck to this hair. And Becca said it looked like a caveman. It looked like it should have been carrying a club, something of this nature, because she said a real thick brow ridge, real sunken eyes, black eyes. The skin was a real dark tanned leather, like a baseball glove, an old baseball glove. real wrinkly face. She couldn't make much of the mouth. It was just like a thin slit, real big jaw, she said. Donnie said he was just in such shock. He wasn't even looking at the face. He kind of started looking down at the ground. Becca was the only one that actually looked at it. And she screamed. As soon as this thing came into view and kind of squatted down to look in there at them, she screamed, right? This thing got startled by the scream, and they heard it run off a few steps and then start circling back. Donnie, at this point, being just 10 years old, he started crying. They had their little 22 Chipmunk rifle with them. They always brought it with in case they saw a ptarmigan or a spruce chicken or a snowshoe hare, you know, just part of the subsistence lifestyle. But they immediately, she closed the flap, and they're just little ties on that thing. I mean, the zipper that was on it had long been destroyed somehow, so there's just these like 5 or 6 little ties on the inside to tie it shut. She ties it shut, and they're sitting in the center, and they turn the lamp down even lower and stoke the fire. Now, I asked, well, what was the purpose of stoking the fire? She said that the amount of time when they heard it trot off and then start circling back, it got quiet and still for a while before it started moving again, and it started cooling off in the tent. So that's why that happened. So she said as they were whispering to each other, they heard grunting, a weird grunt, and then a moment later they heard what sounded like it sniffing the tent. Now, when she heard the sniffing in the tent, she turned. Now, at the top of this tent, you got to understand it has an opening that you run a log pole through or 2x material to hold the peak of this tent up. When she looked out this hole that was triangular shaped, she could see this thing sniffing inside, right? Freaked out. She immediately said, I'm going to shoot you, I'm going to shoot you. And it goes quiet, and this thing moved away from that little opening at the peak. Now, when they were sitting there, they were both crying at this time, and they didn't know what to do because they got the snow machine outside. They could start it, but this thing is right outside with them, right? So Becca's talking to Donnie, saying, "Calm down, we're okay. If it tries to come in, I'll shoot it. Someone will hear the gunshot, and they will come." And when she said that, she goes, I'm gonna shoot anyway, and make noise. I'll shoot out the whole 3 shots like they were taught in case of emergency. 3 shots, right? So she's in the midst of about to shoot 3 shots out that back hole to get attention, right? Now, just as that's about to happen, she's just pulling the rifle up, and on the little Chipmunk, you got to pull back this little. It's basically the firing pin, right? You got to pull it back. So she was just in the process of pulling that back when she heard it moving, and she saw the side of the tent start getting pushed in like it was running its hand along the side of it. She froze. She said at that moment she didn't know what to do. She wasn't breathing because it was pushing in pretty far. It was causing the whole place to shift and whatnot, right? Because this is set up basically a couple A-frames with a pole across to a couple other A-frames and the tent in the middle tied off, right? It was sturdy to keep it up, but not for someone to be pushing on it, you know? So they're freaking out. And then she yells out, leave us alone, leave us alone. And she turns and points the rifle out that hole, and pow, lets a shot off, right? With the little 22. She racks it, pops in another round because they're just single shot. She puts in another round, pulls the thing back, fires again, pow. She shoots 3 shots in succession, and they're waiting for the posse to arrive, right? Meanwhile, this thing had backed away again, and they heard it moving around. You got to remember, heavy snow is falling. The concussive sound of the 22 was facing away from the village proper. They're more than 400 yards away, and it's snowing real heavy, so that sound didn't travel like she wanted it to. No one came. She said they sat there for probably another hour, and they're freaking out because the whole time they hear this thing. Well, it just so happens that 2 of those sled dogs that I mentioned earlier, they showed up. Now, these two sled dogs, they're sled dogs. I've always called them sled dogs or village dogs. What breed is probably a mix of husky and Malamute and something else. I mean, I'm sure there's someone far better, like a veterinarian or something, that knows the exact mix of this breed, but I call them sled dogs, you know. Medium size, real skinny, and they love to run. You just can't stop them from running. So these dogs show up, and this particular one dog was a dog that had always been aggressive towards the kids, and so she was scared instantly because it was pushing its way underneath the flap of the tent. And she saw it, called it by name, and the dog responded and backed out. And then they heard growling. So she assumed the dogs came with some people. So she unties, and Donnie's behind her. She has the .22 rifle. She had him hold it. It wasn't cocked or anything, but there was a round in it, and she told him, if you need to, you know how to shoot it. So she unties everything and opens the flap. Now, when she opens the flap, the dogs are about, she's guessing because, you know, everything happened real fast at this point. The dogs were about 10 feet away off to the left a little bit when she looked at them. Now, when the dogs showed up and everything, she had turned up the lantern to its full brightness. Now, when she did that, of course, it's casting light out the door, and she could see snow falling heavy, and the two dogs were right there, about 10 feet away. And as she stepped out, she heard a noise from behind her, and at that moment, those two dogs rushed past her into the blinding snow, because when she turned, she was just getting pelted by snow, and she couldn't see nothing, so she tucked back inside. She hears snarling, growling, barking, some weird grunt noises, and then a whoop and a scream. A very, very loud scream. Well, when that scream happened, a moment later, she doesn't remember exactly how long, but she said it wasn't very long. The two dogs came running back into the tent because she didn't tie it back off. She just closed the flap. Two dogs run in there, and they're sitting there. They didn't know what the hell to do, right? This snow is coming down real hard. Anyone who's been up here in a whiteout snow condition, it's not pleasant. It is not. You can't see nothing. Even if you got your headlights on bright, it's just white and you see snow falling. That's all you see. So that's the conditions they were dealing with. So the dogs are sitting there, and they immediately have a connection with these dogs. Until she said she was crying, holding the dog that's always been aggressive towards the kids, which, you know, it didn't make sense to her that this dog is all of a sudden, you know, there for them. You know, it was real weird. She said she could see their ropes had been chewed, so they literally chewed their own line to break free and run over there. She said a little while later they heard the sound of snow machines coming that way. Now, when the snow machines are coming, they ran out. They ran out the door. They wanted adults. They wanted adults to be there and all that. Well, what they didn't see when they run out, their uncle was on one snow machine. He was in the lead, and when he was pulling up, he's yelling, but they can't really hear what he's saying, right? Because you got the sound of the motor and all that. And he pulls up and he guns it towards them, and they startle, they back up, right? And it had the effect their uncle wanted, was to push him back into the tent, because he come flying up, and he can make out this figure off to the side of the tent. So facing the tent, it was off to the left-hand side about 25 feet. He could see the figure. They didn't hear no gunshots. They heard that scream come from this thing. So him and a couple other the neighbors came immediately, right? So according to what she said when she talked to her uncle later, when he was pulling up, he saw it, and it looked like it was coming forward towards them to maybe potentially snatch one of them. And that's why he gunned the snow machine towards him to startle him back inside the line of the tent. But as soon as he pulls up, he starts firing his gun. She doesn't remember what kind it was. It was his hunting rifle, she called it. I would guess 270 or better, you know, probably a 30-06 or a 300 Win Mag. It doesn't matter. But he starts shooting at this thing, and his other neighbor that pulls up beside him was a second or third cousin to Donnie and Becca, but they opened fire too. Now, from what her uncle told her later, when they started shooting, this thing just disappeared in the snow, and they were basically making noise after it. So what they did was they gathered the kids and got them on the snow machines and left. They left the snow machine the kids were borrowing with the sled attached and the tent right there, and they got the kids back to the village, to the house, talked to them for a little while, got them calmed down, got them to bed. And she said the next morning, when Uncle left to go retrieve the stuff, he didn't want the kids anywhere near there. The snow had stopped. They got an accumulation of almost 3 feet overnight on top of probably the foot that had already fallen when all this went down, right? So when they went back, there was no tracks to be found. They wanted to track it down and run it off for good, and they didn't have the opportunity because there was no tracks to follow because of the heavy snow. He did mention to them that it broke the center pole of the tent, because when the uncle put this tent post up, it was fresh wood. It wasn't beetle kill or any of that, right? The poles he used were ones that he had recently cut earlier in that year for that was his moose hunting tent. And so the poles were fresh and specifically the same size they needed to be to prop this tent up. It broke the center pole and collapsed the back part of the tent. Thankfully, the way the wood stove was when it happened, it was either the fire was already out, or it just so happened the way it collapsed down, it had a pocket of space around this wood stove, so it didn't catch the tent on fire. I want to thank Donnie and Becca for sharing. It was difficult. They originally reached out to me almost 2 years ago, but scheduling, Becca's in college, she was out of state for a while. Donnie, it was hard to get a hold of him, but I got everything, and I want to thank them for their efforts. Becca doesn't like talking about the hairy man, but she agreed to share because she doesn't want to scare people out of the woods. She kind of holds the same thought I do of just letting people know. I asked her, I was like, well, were you ever taught about the hairy man? And she said, yeah, but when they were told the stories about the hairy man, it was always old stories, like, so she didn't know what to make of them being so young. She was only 12 or whatever at the time. But anyway, I want to thank them. I want to thank them for their efforts. Sometimes it's not easy, getting back in touch with people and whatnot, but I want to thank them for sharing. And let's see, hopefully I get my computer issues fixed here, and I'll have Miss Carol's video up next. I talked to her yesterday, but anyway, we'll get to that when the video comes. Also, the Copper River Valley, I'm getting contacted by people who have been out in that area from Chitina to McCarthy back in the 80s on through up to current and even further back. So what I'll probably do is incorporate those experiences in with Miss Carol's update, just to make it a longer video, or maybe I'll two-part it. But I want to thank you guys for joining me, and we'll catch you on the next one.